Hello, this is Elizabeth Ortel, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Wednesday, June 24th issue of the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The first article I'd like to share with you from the front page of the Democrat and Chronicle is CDC employees say cuts hinder its mission. Survey shows concerns over agency's ability to protect public health, by Candace Johnson. Since the Trump administration took office in January 2025, the workforce at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has weathered uncertainty and change. Mass firings, communication freezes, political interference in the CDC's scientific mission, and a revolving door of leaders have created a challenging work environment for the CDC's employees. I'm a public health researcher who studies how working conditions affect employee health and well-being. I also worked at the CDC from 2012 to 2020. Given the turmoil imposed on the CDC workforce since Inauguration Day, I worked with a team of researchers at Michigan State University to conduct an anonymous survey of more than 600 CDC workers. We found a CDC workforce concerned by a declining ability to achieve the agency's public health mission, a shrinking and overworked staff, and wide-ranging effects that threaten Americans' health. The CDC's mission is to protect and improve the health of Americans, which it fulfills by preventing, detecting, and controlling disease. CDC also staffs a pool of public health experts who are rapidly deployed to respond to public health emergencies, including disease outbreaks worldwide. The cuts to CDC put these functions in jeopardy. Key CDC posts empty as Ebola outbreak grows. As an explosive Ebola virus outbreak takes hold in Central Africa, infectious disease experts are questioning the U.S. government's ability to effectively respond to public health emergencies following the cuts to the CDC and foreign aid, as well as the U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The CDC remains without strong leadership at a critical point in the outbreak response. In August, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. fired CDC Director Susan Monares after she refused to accept political interference with the agency, causing multiple senior CDC leaders to resign in protest. Almost 1 year later, the CDC's top leadership positions remain vacant. The agency has no director, principal deputy director, chief of staff, or chief medical officer to lead employees through a complicated emergency response. But in our survey, we were most interested in knowing how this administration's changes have affected CDC's rank and file workforce, who are on the front lines of protecting Americans' health. Survey: CDC workers say emergency response is eroding. Between February and April, our team distributed our anonymous survey through employee and alumni groups, LinkedIn, and professional networks. We received responses from 433 current and 191 former CDC employees who had left since January 2025. 95% were federal employees, and the rest contractors or other non-federal workers. The survey questions asked how the second Trump administration's changes have affected their day-to-day work. We presented our initial findings at the annual meeting of the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists as we prepare for publication in an academic journal. More than 99% of CDC employees we surveyed, 604 out of 605, said that the administration's changes to the CDC reduced its capacity to respond to a public health emergency. For example, during the 2014-2016 Ebola virus outbreak, the CDC sent its public health professionals, including me, on more than 3,000 deployments to West Africa to control the outbreak. But today, in the midst of another growing Ebola outbreak, deep cuts to the CDC workforce mean that the agency may no longer have sufficient personnel to deploy at the same capacity if needed. Americans are already seeing this in the CDC's response to ongoing measles outbreaks in the United States. Public health experts note that the CDC's communication with the public about the outbreaks has been confusing and sparse, which they attribute to the cuts. Losses to the CDC workforce. The CDC is home to a specialized public health workforce tasked with responding to the nation's most important health problems. Since January 2025, the CDC has lost just over a quarter of its federal employee workforce. More than 1,000 employees were fired after their positions were eliminated, with hundreds remaining on administrative leave due to a court order preventing their firing. Resignations, retirements, and contract non-renewals have further shrunk the workforce. "We have the same amount of work," wrote a CDC manager whose work unit was particularly hard hit by staff losses, "but it is not possible to do all of it with half the staff." Among the current CDC workers we surveyed, 85% say they were burning out. These cuts and challenges have made CDC employees pessimistic about the agency's future. Of the current CDC employees we surveyed, 1 in 5 have decided to leave, further straining CDC's resources. The vast majority who left voluntarily, 95%, told us they left mostly or entirely because of changes implemented by the current administration. The anti-vaccine, anti-science stance of this administration meant that I could no longer, in good conscience, continue to work there given the type of work that I did, a former CDC manager explained. Similar reasons were given by senior CDC leaders and scientists who resigned in protest since January 2025, citing budget cuts, scientific censorship, and political interference with the CDC's public health mission as the reasons they resigned. The CDC's non-scientific workforce was also hard hit, with the Department of Health and Human Services eliminating the CDC's digital media teams, offices handling equal employment opportunity complaints and Freedom of Information Act requests, and much of human resources and acquisitions. In our survey, 94% of CDC employees said that under this administration, it became harder to do their job. Although the CDC's responses to infectious disease outbreaks like hantavirus or Ebola virus tend to dominate headlines, much of the agency's day-to-day work focuses on chronic disease and injury prevention. Chronic diseases are the #1 killer of Americans, and injuries are the #1 killer of American children. Despite Kennedy's assertions that his administration will focus on preventing chronic disease, he has quietly shuttered many of the CDC's chronic disease and injury prevention programs, including those dedicated to improving women's health, preventing violence and injuries, tracking infertility, reducing tobacco use, and promoting healthy aging. President Donald Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget proposed eliminating the CDC's chronic disease and injury prevention programs entirely. The final funding bill rejected these cuts. We asked current and former CDC employees in chronic disease and injury prevention programs what happened to their work unit this administration. Only 3 of 142, or 2%, said their work unit remains fully operational and able to meet its public health mission. We asked everyone we surveyed if they thought Americans will die because of the administration's changes to the agency. 95% said yes. Many of the CDC's functions are invisible to the general public, making it easy to hide the extent to which the agency has been damaged. In addition to responding to public health emergencies and preventing disease, the CDC plays a vital role in sustaining the nation's public health infrastructure. About 80% of the CDC's domestic budget goes to fund public health programs run by state, territorial, tribal, and local partners, directly protecting health in local communities. Health departments around the country are now grappling with sudden cuts to the federal funding that sustains their health data collection and health promotion activities. I believe that current and recent CDC employees have the best view of how the administration's cuts are affecting the agency. Their observations warn of a U.S. government losing its ability to protect the nation's health. Town rejects cannabis pop-up. There's a picture here of Twisted Cannabis FLX co-owner Ian Bonney, pictured with his wife Megan, who expect to try again next year to have a cannabis showcase event in the town of Canandaigua. The event request was denied June 22nd. Canandaigua won't share in tax revenue by Mike Murphy. For now, proposed cannabis showcase events in the town of Canandaigua are no-go. Ian Bonney, who owns Twisted Rail Brewing Company and Twisted Cannabis FLX, sought the town's okay to hold these recently state-approved pop-up sale events at Star Cider in Canandaigua, on concert nights at Constellation Brands Marvin Sands Performing Arts Center, or CMAC. The board unanimously said no after a public hearing June 22nd. Tax revenue was among the sticking points. Because the town in 2021 opted out of allowing cannabis retailers to operate in its borders, the tax revenue for the showcase sales would be shared by the municipalities where Twisted Cannabis stores operate, Geneva, Manchester, and Bloomfield, but not the town of Canandaigua. The state did allow municipalities that opted out to host showcase events, but required their approval. Supervisor Don Cotter, echoed by others on the board, called the vote a business decision. Other board members also wanted to see a process developed for approvals of such events first. We have the expense with no revenue, Cotter said. After the vote, Bonney said he respected the decision but expects to try again for next concert season. I think that it's the right decision for them because there's too much unknown yet for them not having opted in. Most of the handful of people who spoke at the hearing, including the owner of a cannabis retail store in the city of Canandaigua, urged the board not to allow the showcase events, most wanting the board to stick to the original opt-out decision. The board did, however, vote to direct town staff to study the issue and develop a process for guidance for future requests. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Another article that I'll share from the front page: Friends Remember Hero Killed at Mafia Hub by Kayla Kane. Friends of Cameron Nelson say they were not surprised to learn the Rochester man was trying to stop a domestic violence dispute when he was fatally stabbed outside the Mafia Hub early June 20th. The Mafia Hub is on St. Paul Street in Rochester. The 33-year-old was known for helping anyone in need, friends said, and many believe that instinct led him to intervene moments before his death. Nelson was a helper at heart, they said. If you ever knew Cam Nelson, you'll know the stories all have one thing in common. He was the first to do anything he could to help you. Amanda McNitch wrote on Facebook, an extra cig, food, anything you needed. It was, I got you. Police said the 33-year-old was fatally stabbed several times outside the Mafia Hub bar around 3:30 a.m. June 20th. Nelson, a cook at the bar, saw a couple fighting outside and attempted to intervene, according to police. Cam did what many people wouldn't, bar manager Kyber Amal and Jonathan Quinones said in a joint statement. When he observed a domestic altercation in the adjacent alley, he leaped into action without hesitation to defend a woman in need. That was a single, selfless act of bravery. His life was taken senselessly. He died a hero. In the days following Nelson's death, many took to social media to celebrate his character and mourn his loss. Rochester police said the incident began when 23-year-old Alexavier Cologne became involved in an argument with his girlfriend inside the bar. The couple moved outside, where the dispute escalated into a physical altercation. When Nelson attempted to intervene, police alleged Cologne stabbed the man several times and then fled. Cologne was arrested and charged with second-degree murder the same day. Police said Cologne was released from prison last month and was wearing a GPS ankle monitor at the time of his arrest. He recently completed a 3-year prison sentence for criminal possession of a weapon in connection to a 2021 shooting on Sullivan Street. The Mafia Hub said it will strengthen security measures and review the guest screening process in light of the incident. The bar said it is committed to honoring Nelson's legacy through future community-focused initiatives. A GoFundMe has been started to assist with funeral costs. A police investigation is ongoing. RPD has asked anyone with video footage or information to call 911. Now, an article from page 2A, the news section on Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Reflecting pool always plagued with problems. Trump renovation lasted in Monuments history. Latest in Monuments history. This could reflect poorly on the nation. The Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool has been a contest of wills between man and nature from its earliest beginnings, historical records show. But a modern controversy rages on as President Donald Trump posts daily updates on Truth Social about the latest challenges at the iconic pool. Trump pegged the pool as a problem earlier this year as his administration rushed to set a stage for the country's 250th birthday celebration in the nation's capital. But that refurbishment, authorized by a National Park Service contract in April, is only the latest in a saga of repairs, cleaning, and improvement efforts that dates back more than 50 years. Within days of the pool being refilled in early June, the water had turned green and algae clouded amid a heat wave in Washington, D.C. that saw temperatures reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Pool professionals, water experts, and federal websites report that warm weather and sunlight are prone to create algae issues in ponds, pools, and fountains. In a recent Truth Social post, Trump blamed vandals for the troubles that have cropped up after the $16 million renovation of the pool. We've cleaned, renovated, and beautified over 45 monuments and memorials, 28 statues, and 22 fountains in Washington, D.C. Things are looking really good in our nation's capital, the Trump Truth Social Post stated. However, we've had some real problems with vandalism at the beautiful reflecting pool, which sits between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. Numerous engineering problems arose even as the Lincoln Memorial and reflecting pool were in the original design phase, according to a 1923 article in The Military Engineer. Here's a look at articles, reports, and events related to pool maintenance and construction over the last century. 1922, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated, according to a copy of the Lincoln Memorial History from the National Park Service. Although the web page appears to be no longer valid, it's stored by the nonprofit Digital Library Internet Archive. 1923, the reflecting pool was completed. 1978, the pool was being cleaned twice annually, with 10 to 15 large truckloads of debris removed at each cleaning, the National Park Service reported. In 1981, a full reconstruction was undertaken to address water leakage and drainage, with self-sustaining methods introduced to maintain the appearance. Then, in 1986, an engineering report concluded the pool's structural system was failing. Then, in July 2008, the reflecting pool is stagnant and full of muck. The thick layer of algae on the pool and ponds is hard to miss, especially the smell, reported the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, now part of the USA Today network. Then, in December 2009, the National Park Service issued a 209-page report on the pool. It included reconstruction alternatives, including using proprietary biological chemicals to abate algae growth, adding continuous water turnover to inhibit algae accumulation, or ozone filtration to inhibit algae growth. In November of 2010, construction began on a project to update the pool, which was prone to leaking, holding stagnant water and taking nearly 20 million to 30 million gallons of city water a year to refill. September 2012 brought days after the $34 million restoration project was complete. The pool was filled with algae, USA Today and the Washington Post reported. When the renovations were complete, a company involved with the project wrote that the newer, more sustainable pool could last another century with less maintenance required. Then in June 2017, the pool was drained to control a parasite outbreak that killed more than 80 ducks and ducklings. May of 2019, the Park Service began draining the pool to repair a broken water line, which compromised circulation and led to water quality issues, including algae growth and a green tint to the water. April 3rd, the Department of Interior gave a no-bid $6.8 million contract to Atlantic Industrial Coatings. April 23rd, Trump unveiled the restoration project, saying a contractor is going to coat the pool in American flag blue. May 7th, Trump's motorcade drove across the empty reflecting pool. The same day, another $6.2 million for supplemental work was added to the original contract. On May 11th, the Cultural Landscape Foundation sued the Trump administration over the planned color of the pool resurfacing. June 4th, water began flowing back into the pool. June 14th, reports began to emerge that algae blooms turned the water in the pool green again. June 16th, Federal contracting records showed the cost of the pool renovation had risen to $16 million, including $14.2 million to Atlantic Industrial Coatings, a $1.7 million contract from the National Park Service was listed for Green Water Solutions, a company with ties to John Cafaro, a longtime Trump contributor who owns a home in Palm Beach, Florida, less than a mile from Mar-a-Lago. June 19th, Trump blamed vandalism at the pool for the troubles with the renovation, and he announced people were being arrested. Reading from the Democrat Chronicle. Man charged after motel fire kills 6 in Endwell. A man has been arrested in connection with a motel fire that killed 6 people and displaced more than 70 others in Broome County, according to New York State Police. Tyler J. Russell, 24, of Endwell, was charged Monday night with 6 counts of second-degree manslaughter and 1 count of fourth-degree arson, all felonies, state police said. Russell was living at the Knights Inn at the time of the fire, according to state police spokeswoman Trooper Aga Tinker. Authorities have not released details about what actions led to the charges. Tinker said the arson charge alleges a person damaged a building or vehicle by intentionally starting a fire or causing an explosion, but declined to discuss the specific allegations in the case. Russell was being held at the Broome County Jail pending arraignment. The fire broke out Monday morning at the Knights Inn, 2603 East Main Street in Endwell. Emergency crews were called to the motel shortly after 6 a.m. Heavy black smoke poured from the building as flames rapidly spread through the 2-story structure, eventually burning through the roof. Firefighters from at least 10 departments responded and battled the blaze for several hours before bringing it under control. State police confirmed that 6 people died in the fire and 2 others were injured. The victims' identities have not been released. Tinker said neither of the injured individuals suffered life-threatening injuries. 1 person was treated and released from a local hospital, while another was treated at the scene. The Knights Inn has been used by the Broome County Department of Social Services as emergency housing for people experiencing homelessness. The American Red Cross estimated that 73 residents were displaced by the fire. Vestal United Methodist Church was opened as a temporary shelter for those affected. Community support quickly followed. More than $19,000 was donated Monday to an emergency relief fund established by the United Way of Broome County to assist displaced residents. Many residents lost their housing and personal belongings, including clothing, medication, and other necessities. The cause of the fire remains under investigation. Authorities have not released additional information about what may have sparked the blaze. Listening to a reading of articles and features through the Democrat Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next, I'll read from page 4A of the Rochester Democrat Chronicle. Rochester woman pleads guilty in son's fatal fall. A Rochester woman on Monday pleaded guilty to causing the death of her 16-year-old son last fall after this teen jumped onto his mother's car. Anika Connor pleaded guilty in state Supreme Court to second-degree manslaughter and second-degree reckless endangerment, both felonies, and endangering the welfare of a child, a misdemeanor, in connection with the death of her son, Kahari Gibson. according to the Monroe County District Attorney's Office. Gibson, 16, was found unconscious in the street on Breck Street on October 10th after he jumped onto his mother's vehicle during an argument over his cell phone. Video evidence showed the vehicle accelerating, causing the teenager to fall to the pavement. He was rushed to Strong Memorial Hospital, where he died nearly a month later, on November 7th, due to the injuries he suffered during the fall. Connor was indicted by a Monroe County grand jury and was arrested in December. She was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in state prison by State Supreme Court Justice Stephen Miller as part of the plea agreement, according to the DA's office. Farmington woman killed in motorcycle crash in Marcellus. One person was killed and a second was seriously injured in a motorcycle crash in Marcellus, Onondaga County, on June 21st. A two-vehicle crash occurred at Route 20 and Slate Hill Road in Marcellus around 10:10 a.m. Sunday, according to New York State Police. A northbound car on Slate Hill Road had stopped at the crossroads, but reportedly failed to yield the right-of-way to an eastbound motorcycle, and the two collided, Trooper Jennifer Giron said in a news release. The pair on the motorcycle were thrown from the motorcycle and taken to Upstate University Hospital in Syracuse for treatment. The motorcyclist was identified as Bruce Stratton, and his passenger was Karen Stratton, trooper said. Karen Stratton, 55, of Farmington, Ontario County, was pronounced dead at the hospital. Bruce Stratton, also 55 and from Farmington, remained hospitalized Monday with injuries that were not considered life-threatening. The driver of the car, an 18-year-old from Jefferson County, was not injured in the crash. Troopers continued to investigate the fatal crash. Onondaga County Sheriff's Office, Marcellus Police Department, Marcellus Ambulance, and Marcellus Fire Department all assisted at the scene. Greece Development Plan draws questions about traffic and growth. A Greece housing development will need another trip before the planning board before receiving preliminary plat approval. Stream Song Estates could construct 71 single-family homes on 32 acres of a 59-acre property along Flynn Road. The condensed layout is intended to maintain the natural buffer around the new homes, built in 5 phases. Residents voiced concerns at the June 17th meeting about access to the property, increased traffic, and high speeds on Flynn Road, and a proposed stub connection to Latta Road to enable future development on an adjacent property. One speaker suggested aligning one of the 2 entrances on Flynn Road with Old Country Road. But the applicant, 1053 Flynn LLC, said they'd been told to stagger them. The developer purchased the property in August 2024 for $1.1 million. A preliminary plan is the conceptual layout for a subdivision, including the location of roads, lots, utilities like sidewalks, and areas to be preserved as open space. The next Greece Planning Board meeting is Wednesday, July 8th. New bridge makes walking to Seaback safer than ever. Sure, sometimes a sidewalk is a sidewalk is a sidewalk, but in the case of a new sidewalk and pedestrian footbridge on State Route 364 near the Finger Lakes Community College campus, it's much more than just a new sidewalk, according to Ontario County Administrator Chris DeBolt. This transformational project makes 2 regional Finger Lake assets in FLCC and Constellation Brands Marvin Sands Performing Arts Center, or CMAC, more accessible to residents, cyclists, students, and CMAC concert attendees, and the commercial areas of State Routes 5 and 20, DeBolt said. It's a critical connection, DeBolt said during a ribbon-cutting ceremony June 22nd for the sidewalk and bridge, which took 5 years to complete. The more than $2 million pedestrian footbridge involves a state transportation alternatives program grant of $1.6 million, Ontario County and Town of Canandaigua funding and collaboration, and $300,000 in private funding through the philanthropic Sands Family Foundation. Here's what residents get: 2,400 feet of sidewalk and bike path, improved lighting and drainage enhancements along Route 364 near CMAC. The collaboration and vision for the project, as well as hard work, helped make the project come to be, according to Richard Sands, the billionaire former chairman and CEO of Constellation Brands. It's not every community that works so well together to make things like this happen, Sands said. State Senator Pam Helming, who was Canandaigua Town Supervisor when the project was discussed early on, said Route 364, also known as East Lake Road, is a busy road on an average day. It's much busier on CMAC concert nights, and the sidewalk will enable concertgoers to walk safely to and from the venue, according to current Canandaigua Town Supervisor Don Cotter, who has witnessed people walking in the roadway on concert nights. This is a great investment in public safety. A highlight of the project is the new pedestrian footbridge, which was fabricated in 2 pieces in northeastern Alabama, transported to Canandaigua, and assembled on site before being placed on its abutments, a logistical feat that reflects the complexity and ambition of the overall project. Fishers Associates served as the engineering firm of record. From page A5, Rochester man survives attack during which hand was severed. A Rochester man's hand was severed during an altercation Sunday night in northeast Rochester. The incident occurred near Joseph and Clifford Avenues around 8:20 p.m. Sunday, according to Rochester police. A 42-year-old man, whose name was not released, was stabbed, officers said. The laceration was severe enough that it severed his hand from his body, said Rochester Police Captain Greg Bello. Bystanders were providing medical aid and comforting the injured man when emergency responders arrived at the scene. Responding officers recognized the injury to be life-threatening and applied a tourniquet. The injured man was taken to Strong Memorial Hospital, where he was rushed into surgery. Following surgery, his injuries were no longer considered life-threatening. The investigation led detectives to a nearby apartment where evidence of shots fired and an AR-style rifle was recovered, according to police. A 12-inch long knife was also recovered from the scene. As of Monday, no charges were filed in connection with the incident. Detectives from RPD's Criminal Investigation Section are investigating the incident. Anyone with information is encouraged to call 911. Trump. Iran agreed to inspections. Tehran denies claims on nuclear program assets. President Donald Trump said on June 23rd that Iran had agreed to nuclear inspections into infinity, despite Tehran's denials, and that unfrozen Iranian Assets would be used to buy humanitarian supplies from the United States. Washington agreed to waive sanctions on Iran for 60 days from June 22nd after the first round of talks under a nascent peace deal on ending more than 3 months of war. Vice President J.D. Vance said the talks with Iranian officials in the Swiss mountain resort of Bergenstock laid a good foundation for a final accord, and that Tehran had agreed to allow nuclear inspectors back into the country. But Iran denied it had begun discussions on its nuclear program at the talks, mediated by Qatar and Pakistan, and said it had not agreed to invite back International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai said on June 23rd, Iranian officials had not held a meeting with IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi in Switzerland and had no plans for the United Nations nuclear watchdog to inspect Iran's damaged nuclear facilities. Trump hit back on June 23rd at what he said were protestations and false statements. Iran has fully and completely agreed to highest-level nuclear inspections long into the future, infinity, Trump said in a post on Truth Social. He also said any Iranian assets unfrozen under the deal would be placed in an escrow account and used to buy food and medical supplies from the United States, including corn, wheat, and soybeans from our great American farmers. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva had earlier on June 23rd denied there had been any such agreement. Iran is the only country to decide what to do with its assets, which are going to be defrozen, and so I reject any claim about that if there would be any role for any other country to have an influence on those decisions or on those processes, Ali Bahraini told reporters. The conflicting statements highlighted the uncertainty facing negotiations to halt a war that has upended the Middle East. On June 22nd, the sides agreed on a mechanism to end fighting between U.S. ally Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon, and opened a communications line to help ensure safe passage for commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital waterway for global oil supplies blockaded by Iran during the war, in the first of several steps to provide economic relief to Iran. The U.S. Treasury announced a waiver until August 21st on sanctions, allowing Tehran to sell oil and related products and receive payment for them. Bahraini said good progress had been made in the talks and that 2 working groups would be established in coming days to focus on the removal of sanctions and Iran's nuclear activities. He told reporters 5 parts of the initial deal need to be fully implemented before negotiations begin on the nuclear dossier and any role for the IAEA. The ambassador said Lebanon was unquestionable part of the interim accord between the United States and Iran, and that it included the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. A ceasefire has largely held in southern Lebanon since June 21st, but Lebanon's civil defense and state media said Israeli gunfire had killed 2 people there on June 23rd. Hezbollah said the incident violated the ceasefire. Israel has said it will maintain a security zone in southern Lebanon and continue to act to neutralize threats against Israeli soldiers and citizens. Israel and Lebanon were due to start a new round of talks in Washington on June 23rd. Lebanese officials have insisted that face-to-face negotiations with Israel are the only way to secure an end to the war, raging since March 2nd, when Hezbollah fired at Israel in support of Iran and triggered Israeli air and ground attacks that have killed more than 4,000 people in Lebanon and displaced millions. But 4 rounds of Lebanese-Israeli talks since April have failed to produce a durable ceasefire. Instead, the longest lull in fighting came after Iran and the United States agreed to a memorandum of understanding that stipulated fighting would halt across all fronts, including Lebanon. That deal buoyed Iran-backed Hezbollah and dealt a blow to the Lebanese state, whose leaders, including President Joseph Aoun, A-O-U-N, had repeatedly warned that Tehran cannot negotiate on Lebanon's behalf. A Lebanese official and 2 foreign officials working on Lebanon told Reuters the Iran-U.S. deal had pulled the rug out from the Lebanese state, leaving it in its weakest position yet, and throwing into question the utility of its talks with Israel. The Lebanese official was skeptical that any tangible progress would come out of the negotiations, which are set to last for 3 days. Tanker traffic through Hormuz started to pick up on June 22nd, although Iran and Oman suggested in a joint statement that there may be costs involved in using the strait, whose closure pushed up oil prices and global inflation. Oman and Iran said a joint working group would seek agreement on administrating navigation in the strait, the services provided, and associated costs. Any arrangements, they said, must respect their sovereignty and sovereign rights. Oil prices have fallen since the interim deal, which was reached, settling 3% lower on June 22nd. The war with Iran has become a political liability at home for Trump and his fellow Republicans in Congress as midterm elections loom in November. Opinion polls showing public frustration over a rise in gas prices since the war began, and Trump faces pressures from Republicans who say Iran's nuclear program must be completely shut down. Articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hair loss is hitting men at an earlier age. Male androgenetic alopecia. The most common form of hair loss in men affects 30 to 50% of men by age 50, according to research published in the NIH's Endotex database. But more men are starting hair loss treatments in their 20s, not their 40s. The reason is simple. A major misconception about male pattern hair loss is that it starts when a man first notices it, said Dr. Ken Anderson, a triple board-certified hair restoration surgeon and adjunct clinical professor of dermatology at Emory University School of Medicine. The reality is that by the time thinning is discovered, a significant percentage of hair density has already been lost. For a long time, hair loss was treated as a punchline: comb-overs, bad toupees, the stuff of sitcom jokes. Men were expected to laugh it off or silently accept it. But that's shifting, and more men are treating hair loss like a health habit. Something can be done, and the sooner you start, the better. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified hair care provider before starting, stopping, or modifying any treatment or medication. The causes of male pattern blindness come down to genetics and hormones. In men who develop it, hair follicles are genetically sensitive to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, a hormone derived from testosterone. Over time, DHT causes those follicles to shrink, producing thinner, shorter hairs until they stop growing altogether. Time equals follicles, said Dr. Alan Bauman, a board-certified hair restoration specialist. It's a predictable pattern. Thinning often starts at the temples and crown, which is why receding hairlines and bald spots tend to appear before scattered thinning does. The gene responsible doesn't follow a straight line. Male pattern baldness is not inherited like the shape of one's nose, Anderson said. It can skip generations and randomly appear in someone with no known family history of hair loss. This can be a source of frustration for many men. That unpredictability is why early awareness matters. You can't always see it coming. It's useful to track changes over time. Men's biology hasn't changed. What has changed is that men are paying attention earlier and seeking treatments. The biggest change I've seen is that men are talking about this sooner and with more self-awareness than they did 5 years ago, said Jessica Mears, a licensed clinical psychologist at Rhythm Wellness in Houston. There's less pretending not to care, the "it doesn't bother me" attitude that doesn't match their body language, and more openness about their discomfort. For younger men especially, the stigma is fading. 5 years ago, asking your doctor about finasteride felt embarrassing, said Tracy Collins, a licensed clinical psychologist. Now it's closer to getting a prescription for acne. Effective treatments are easier to access than ever thanks to telehealth. The wellness industry has reframed hair loss as something to manage proactively, not something to just grin and bear. Not all hair loss treatments are created equal, and knowing the difference can save time, money, and frustration. Finasteride and minoxidil are the two most clinically supported options available. Finasteride works by reducing DHT, which slows the progression of hair loss at the hormonal level. Minoxidil improves blood flow to the follicle and prolongs the growth phase. This means existing hairs grow thicker and stronger. Used together, they address the problem from two different angles. I often prescribe this combination because studies have shown that the two of them together are more effective than either one alone, said Anderson. PRP, or platelet-rich plasma, is a growing option. I've seen some excellent responses. Hair transplants are the most definitive cosmetic solution, but they treat loss that has already happened rather than preventing future loss. Anderson compares hair loss to dental decay. Both are incurable, progressive, and require daily maintenance to slow the progression. Finasteride, minoxidil, and PRP are akin to brushing, flossing, and dental cleanings. A hair transplant, in the dental decay analogy, is like filling a cavity. Platforms like Hims and Chronicle have made it easy for men to access finasteride and minoxidil without a traditional doctor's visit. For men who might otherwise delay treatment out of embarrassment or inconvenience, that accessibility helps. But it can come with limitations. Don't trade convenience for effectiveness, said Bauman. A questionnaire-based intake may not catch underlying causes of hair loss, such as thyroid issues, nutritional deficiencies, or autoimmune conditions, the way an in-person evaluation would. For straightforward male pattern baldness, subscription plans can be a reasonable starting point. For anything more complex, consider visiting a dermatologist or hair restoration specialist. Treating hair loss isn't a one-time decision, and the most effective approaches combine multiple strategies. A basic hair loss routine might include a DHT blocker like finasteride taken daily to slow hormonal hair loss at the source, minoxidil, topical or oral, applied or taken daily to stimulate growth and thicken existing hair. A gentle, sulfate-free shampoo. Harsh shampoos won't cause hair loss, but they can stress already vulnerable hair. Scalp care, keeping your scalp clean, supports the environment follicles needed to thrive. Regular check-ins with a dermatologist. Hair loss is progressive, and what works at one stage may need adjusting at another. Finasteride and minoxidil both require at least 6 months of consistent use before visible improvement. Full results can take up to a year or longer. The science of hair loss solutions continues to develop, with researchers exploring cell-based therapies and new treatments. What's clear is that for many men, hair loss is becoming just another element of their health to manage. Let's explore drag history with shows and talks. 2 corsets and crowns events, one in Mumford and one in Pittsford, will explore 19th century drag history. The first at Genesee Country Village and Museum will include music, comedy, and history-inspired fun. The museum's 3rd annual event will begin at 5:30 p.m. Saturday, June 27th, with a reception including drinks and appetizers at the John L. Whale Gallery. At 6:30 p.m., a buffet and bar will open in a meeting center. At 7 p.m., a drag show will begin, featuring drag queens Mrs. Kasha Davis, Darian Lake, and Carmen Adore. Been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wednesday, June 24th issue of the Democrat and Chronicle. Your reader has been Elizabeth Ortel. Thank you for listening.